time delay.
Maybe it's on a time delay, isn't it? Do you hear me? Just no.
Oh, there we go. Okay, yeah. Time delay, so I won't keep it in there. Well, good evening. Thank you so much, Celeste, for having me, and thank you all for coming out. It was great. It's great to be here. I was afraid I was going to be lost because I came in and I told someone it looks like Versailles. Well, it's better, of course, but and I asked them, could I live here or something? Well, there's a waiting list. But at any rate, one small thing, I was previously on the faculties of those. I'm not right now. If I were, I would have to be at school right now. But it is, I think school's already started. But at any rate, I'm going to do this, I'm going to talk, hopefully not too much, and perform for you. But before anything, I want to do this thing I've been doing more recently, which is sort of a lost tradition in classical music, which is improvisation. Because that's what they used to do in the old days. So I figure I have to put that on that, burden. No, it shouldn't be, but that I should do that myself, even if I'm not great at it, because that's what they did, and it's kind of can be fun. And what I need is your help, because, first of all, I need a few notes, and then random notes, and then we're going to think about what mood, or do you want me to parody a composer, or do you want me to do something more serious? It's up to you. It's kind of, you're telling me what to do with the cake, and I'll bake it. So please give me a random note.
E flat.
E flat. Oh, very good. Yeah, usually people say C. I like E flat. That's good. Couple more. Random. A. Okay.
B flat.
B flat. You said sorry. So A, B flat. What did you say?
B flat.
Oh, B flat. Okay. So how about how about one more note so it's not West Side Story? How about we can do that? Just Bernstein was his birthday yesterday, by the way. So one more note. G. Okay. Nice. Okay. There's a melody. So I'm just telling you, it could be Chopin-esque. It could be something. I'm not sure. But you tell me. What do you want me to do with it? Chopin-esque. But I said that. Okay. Do you want anything else there? Anything? You want some Mozart and you want some Gershwin. Okay. Let's see if I can do all of the above. And some blues. Okay. Well, that's great. All right. I think let's see what happens. I can't guarantee. And a little Tchaikovsky on the side. Why not? Very nice. Okay. Let's see what happens. So, not to forget, it's something like that. So. Well, that was strange because it was a strange mix of things, but why not? And it just, I like it because, it breaks the ice for me a little bit. But at any rate, let me tell you a couple stories about what I'm doing. I'm doing this odd program, which is it's sort of a tribute to the violin. And the reason being that during the pandemic, I think a lot of us had crazy experiences. Mine was that I watched several documentaries about great violinists of the past, such as Nathan Milstein, Yehudi Menuhin, Jascha Heifetz, etc., you name it. Ivry Gitlis, who I adore. And there's especially one that's on YouTube, it's a PBS documentary, The Art of Violin. It's fantastic. And I said, okay, I'm going to switch instruments. I want to play the violin, I just love it so much. And I told my wife this the next morning, she's a pianist as well. And she was silent and gave me this look. And I smiled and said, okay, well, what are you thinking? And she said, I know somebody who did something like that. And it wasn't a pretty picture. It cost them a lot of years, and how long did it take you to learn piano? And we had our first son at that time, he was only a few months old. We have 2 kids and 2 cats, I told you we have 4 kids, So she said, it's a little tricky maybe, and I said, yeah, you're right. The voice of reason, but plan B came up very quickly that I would play violin repertoire arranged for the piano, of which there's a lot. And I keep finding more, so I keep getting to pretend that I'm a violinist. So that's what this is, that's what I'm doing right now. I've been doing for a while. And I'm going to start with a piece from the 18th century. Late 18th century, it's called Gavotte by Gossec. Gavotte is a type of dance, and it's from his opera Rosine. The French love to have dance in their operas. It's like North Carolinians, we like to have Texas Pete with our barbecue. It's the same idea, It depends where you are in the state, but at any rate, can you imagine Wagner having a dance in his operas? But the French put dance into his operas when they came to Paris, and you could imagine he was not thrilled. But this, it's played on the violin frequently. There's an old, wonderful 1926 recording of Misha Elman, who was born in Odessa. It's one of my favorites, playing this, and it's incredible. It's incredible. So this Gavotte, historically, I mentioned Versailles because I was thinking about Versailles because Gossec wrote this right before the French Revolution. So it's that world of the powdered wigs, the, curly letter writing with all kinds of twists of phrasing, etc. That era, which was soon to be over, for better or worse, is in this piece. That's how I see it. It just has this gracefulness to it. Now, but it's very funny, also, this piece. It's very funny because it has a sort of a musical hiccup, if you will. I'll show you what I mean. It's right there, and it just keeps coming out. So it's odd, it's like somebody's talking very politely and elegantly, and then suddenly a hiccup. And for that reason, I think the Looney Tunes used it on several occasions. So it's a nice piece. Now, Gossec is somewhat overlooked. We know, we hear Mozart, we hear Haydn, but there's a lot of wonderful composers from that time, the 18th century, that we ignore. Too bad, I think. So anyway, here's Gossec's Gavotte from Rosine. It's quite funny, because 18th century music has humor to it, maybe more so than a lot of 19th century music, which I'm going to go to next. More on humor in a bit. But here's a piece from the late 19th century. By the way, I'm not going in exact chronological order because I'm terrible with exact dates. But this is all going to be rather short pieces tonight. So this is a piece by Dvorak. It's called Songs My Mother Taught Me. It's actually vocal originally. And there's a wonderful arrangement by Fritz Kreisler for violin. He played it magnificently. And I'm going to actually play some Fritz Kreisler later. Arrangement, of course. So, Dvorak, he was Czech. And the music that he loved especially was folk music, which would be gypsy music, and klezmer music, which are very intertwined and very similar. The folk music of Eastern and Central Europe. His love of folk music, it was such that even when he came to this country, he spent considerable time in New York and even in Iowa. There was a Czech community in Stillville, Iowa. He was there. He heard spirituals, African-American spirituals, and he heard Native American music, and he was really moved by it and told his composition students to incorporate those melodies into their compositions. And he did it himself in the New World Symphony and the American String Quartet. But anyway, this piece, the text is quite beautiful. If I were to sing, I can't sing it, or play the violin for that matter. It's, the words are like, I recall songs that my mother taught to me, and now I teach them to my children. So it's really poignant in that way. So here it is. Forgot to mention that the arrangement there is by a guy named Edward Schutz, who lived in St. Petersburg, Russia. And for that matter, he definitely adds some Russian. I mean, my mother's from Russia originally. My dad's from Southeast Virginia, going back 10 generations. Kind of an interesting mix. We were with my parents last night at an Uzbek restaurant, which is mostly very similar to Russian food I grew up with. And they use, I still feel it because I mean, they use sour cream and the same with that piece. I mean, you heard some Russian, you know, yeah. So because arrangement as an art form, I find it very interesting. It's similar to translation in literature because a good translation is not simply Google Translate word for word for word. It's a reimagining of the piece. So Edward Schutz there, he reimagined that as a piano piece. And it's quite different, especially adding those Russian, you know, thick chords and sour cream and bread, so, Russian dumplings. Anyway, so now I'm gonna actually play a piece that's probably the only original piano piece on this entire program. Yeah, it is. It's the only one that's not an arrangement, but it's the arranged version that's most famous. Okay, this is a piece by Moritz Moskowski, who was Polish, lived in Berlin, was born in Poland, lived at the turn of the last century. And it's called Guitar. It's like emulating the sound of a Spanish flamenco guitar. I mean, you'll hear it in the, So, it's wonderful. It's a very bubbly piece, like bubbles in champagne or something. And his good friend, Pablo de Sarasate, who was a violinist, of course, he heard that piano piece and he said, I need to arrange that for the violin. He did, and that's normally the version you hear. So I'm doing sort of the opposite. I'm playing the original piano version because, you know, I don't play the fiddle. So I have a theory about this piece, and all the pieces I'm playing, they sort of fall into this category of salon pieces. This is more like a salon than a concert hall, and I like that. It's wonderful. It's less formal, you know. It's more, you know, you have paintings and stuff. So that's salon music, salon painting, and oftentimes it's very light-hearted, and has some humor. We're talking about humor, like this piece. And there's the thing that Moskowski is not played very much nowadays. I wonder what he was in his time. And also, many of the old-time pianists like Vladimir Horowitz loved Moskowski's music and played. I have a theory that it's because Moskowski's music is happy, basically. And I think that there's a tendency in classical music today that if a piece is not downright miserable, it's not worth it. It's not worth it, you know? If it's, I'm exaggerating, but, and I don't think so. I think sometimes, you know, sometimes it's okay to laugh. Sometimes it's okay to be happy, and sometimes it can be quite profound to be happy and to have a happy piece. Because the Greeks believed that comic theater had more depth than the tragedies. Aristophanes versus Sophocles. So I think that's interesting. And then think about Mozart and his operas. All right, I hear my wife's voice saying, you're rambling again, Robert. Moskowski guitar. Sergei Rachmaninoff. It was Russian, of course, and this is his piece. It's called Daisies, written in 1916, which was 1 year before he and his family left Russia due to the revolution in 1917. It never went back. On a different note, my mother and her brother, my uncle, who we lost recently, Boris, they left in 1980. My uncle came later, but in the early 80s, in the similar circumstances in a way, they never went back, and my mom doesn't want to go back considering what's going on there. So that Russian nostalgia is a very famous thing, I would say. So this piece is interesting. He wrote it for voice and piano, and then shortly after arranged it for piano solo. I'm playing Rachmaninoff's own arrangement of it. And then violinists like to play it. I think even cellists play it too. So Rachmaninoff was a very interesting and complex character. He probably had, by our standards, clinical depression. He also had Marfan syndrome, they think, because he was very tall and very big hands, but lots of aches and pains in those hands. Usually people think, oh, to have Rachmaninoff's hands, but he suffered, he had a lot of pain in it. So, but he was just deeply entrenched in nostalgia. And if you read his letters, his writings, some of the happiest moments of his life were in his youth when he would visit his grandmother in the countryside. And I think that that's what this piece is about. Daisies in the wide open Russian meadows in the summer. And it has a specific memory for me also, my uncle, Boris, who was not a pianist, he was a writer and novelist. And I would play Rachmaninoff for him, and he would always tell me, you play the notes, but it doesn't speak Russian yet. So he's right, and I hope, that it does now. But, anyway, so I'll play the piece. This is Daisies by Rachmaninoff. You can imagine fields. As my mother always would tell me, and tells me still, that Russia is all about, it's lots of wide open spaces. It's kind of like here, in a way. And that maybe influences why the melodies are so long. Think of a Rachmaninoff melody as, yeah. Still going. And it goes on and on. It's a long, long, long melody, whereas I played the Gossek before. mean, that's a phrase, right? There's a theory, there's a Russian poet, Joseph Brodsky, who said, you know, in Russia, there's lots of space, kind of like here. Aaron Copland's music has long melodies as well. Listen to Appalachian Spring. But, you know, Central and Western Europe, people live closer together. There's not much space in Austria, for example, so the melodies are tighter. I don't know, it's an interesting theory. So, let's see, now I'm going to play something French. I'm going to play Maurice Ravel. This is a pièce en forme de habanera, which means piece in the style of a habanera, which is not only a spicy pepper, it's a it's a dance from Cuba originally. One of my major teachers, Solomon Mikowski, was from Cuba and assigned us Cuban music a lot. There's a lot of wonderful composers from Cuba. Cuban music is this great mix of the music of Spain and of West Africa. And here's the rhythm of a habanera. If you like opera, there's a famous one in Carmen by Bizet. I don't sing it, but I told you. So that was all the rage in Europe at that time, and the French loved it, like Bizet. But here's the funny thing about Ravel. I was just reading about how much he was hated at the time, as was Debussy. Now we accept their music, we love their music, but it's just interesting, like the Impressionist painters, we call them Impressionist composers usually, but the Impressionist painters did not have an initially good reaction from people. It was awful. People said about Monet, they said, what's the matter with this guy? He needs glasses. You know, and it's true, and it was only later that they came to accept, and I was reading about Fauré and Ravel. Fauré taught Ravel and mostly supported him. I love Fauré very much. I play his music, I love his music. But Fauré, Saint-Saëns, that whole generation, they didn't really get what the Impressionists were doing. It wasn't their thing. And Ravel wrote his now much adored string quartet in F major for Fauré, sent it to him, and Fauré wrote him a letter saying, well, clearly it's an utter and complete disaster, this composition. So very encouraging. But anyway, this piece, yeah, it has Debussy's colors to it, but it has more than that. Ravel was a little different. He has some jazzy chords there, some piquant, you know, these. Well, you could see he was buddies with Stravinsky on the one hand. He's also loved American jazz, and jazz musicians loved him. There was this kind of mutual influence between people like Duke Ellington and Ravel. Gershwin, too, Gershwin. Oh, I forgot to put Gershwin in that improvisation, darn it. But anyway, they played tennis together, as did Schoenberg and Gershwin. It was strange. They all played tennis together in Southern California. So Ravel was playing tennis with Gershwin, and Gershwin came up to him and said, look, I want to study with you. I want to learn from you. Ravel said, no way. He said, why become a second-rate Ravel when you could be a first-rate Gershwin? It's a good quote. So, anyway, another feature of Ravel is that his native language was Spanish, not French. He was Basque. His mother was Basque, and he was born in the Basque region. You know, think of Bolero. That's Spanish, or Alvarado de Gracioso by him. It's all Spanish. And this piece. So this is an arrangement for piano solo. The original is for vocalese. Vocalese is like humming, singing with no words. So if someone ever catches you humming, you just tell them, no, I was singing un vocalise, you know. It just sounds pretentious and good. So, I'm joking. So, yeah, but this piano version, of course violin is played on the violin roll, but this piano version was done by a guy named Daniel Ericourt. Does that name ring a bell for anyone? All right, I have a story about that. Sort of a mistake I made, that I played this in Greensboro, and I failed to look up Daniel Ericourt. All I know is he was a French pianist. Yeah, he was a French pianist and composer who knew Ravel and Debussy. And that's all I said. And this lady comes up to me after the concert and says, Robert, you're not going to believe this, but Daniel Ericourt was my neighbor in Greensboro for over 20 years. I said, the same guy? Yeah, the same guy. No way. She said, yeah, I knew he walked his dog and had tea together. Couldn't believe it. I came home, read about him, and he was born France in like 1902 or something, in La Belle Époque. Ended up in teaching at UNC Greensboro, and he stayed in Greensboro. So it's a small world, and note to self, always look up who you're going to talk about. Because you never know.
Who knows? So Ravel / Airy chord. This is the habanero piece.
Later, we're going to get to some more heavy hitter, loud stuff, but you know, it can't all be loud. This is softer, more mellow music. Now I'm going to play something also French, but before Ravel's time, and perhaps in a style that Ravel was rebelling against. This is called La Cinquantaine, the 50th anniversary, from a suite called The Golden Wedding by French composer Jean-Gabriel Marie. And I, for the life of me, could not find out much information about him. He lived in the 19th century. He wrote, you know, romantic music. That's about. I really couldn't find much about him. This piece, it's originally for cello and orchestra, I think, and violinists played a lot. And it's, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, Woody Herman did in the 40s. The big band, Woody Herman Big Band did a version of this piece. The way I feel about it is, might sound cliche, but it's this perfect combination of melancholy and joy. It just combines the two somehow in a very special way. So here it is. me. So anyway, we're going to go to Vienna briefly and then back to France. This is Fritz Kreisler, the Caprice Viennois, Viennese Caprice. It's an early work by Kreisler. I think this is his own arrangement because it's originally for violin and piano. Kreisler, he's one of my absolute favorite composers. He is Vienna, his music. He's so Viennese, just completely, you know. And there's a word in German, Gemütlichkeit, which means, I have a friend from Austria, he said it means coziness, but not exactly. Gemütlichkeit is a feeling that if you're sitting having hot chocolate by a fireplace and it's snowing outside, that's Gemütlichkeit. In Vienna, it should be. And that was Kreisler, that's his music. And even you see videos of him, he was smiling all the time. Very much unlike his good friend, they played pranks on each other too. Rachmaninoff, they met in America. They became good friends. Rachmaninoff was the opposite. Rachmaninoff never smiled. He was just frightening. When someone said he looked like an escaped convict with his shaved head and 6.5 foot tall height. So, but Kreisler was just a wonderful person, very warm and loving. And you'll hear it, you feel it in the music. He left Vienna in the 1930s when the Nazis came to power. And he was escaping anti-Semitism, he was Jewish. And it's just a really disgusting thing that somebody who, anybody, but particularly in the case of Kreisler, he is so Viennese. His music it's the best of Vienna, yet that culture utterly rejected him, to say the least, and he got out. Luckily, he had a very good life in this country. He was very popular as a performer, as a composer. But as somebody said, I forget who it was, I think it was Pierre Boulez, I heard him in New York give an interview, and he's not fond of this kind of music, but he said, Vienna, culturally, it's the waltz, right? And he said, Vienna waltzed off of a cliff around World War I, after World War I. And I think that's very apt what happened. So anyway, this is early Kreisler, it's before all of that, it's more positive. This is the Caprice Viennois by Fritz Kreisler. you know, I have a question, Celeste, especially to everyone. Like, I know it's evening. When should I really start to wrap up? Because I don't want to keep people too late. I guess I just would feel bad. Would 8:05 be okay? Is that okay? All right. But really, are you sure? Because I don't know. Okay, you're positive. Because I don't want to, you know. If anyone really, if you need to go, it's okay. I don't want anyone to feel like they're captive here. So really, don't worry. Okay. That's why I carry on a watch, because I lose track of time playing music, especially things like Christ. So I just get lost in my own world. And then for long, it's like several hours go by, and people are upset. It's not a good thing. Okay, so that's why I'm asking. So now I'm going to play. This is the first movement of César Franck, his violin sonata, arranged by Alfred Cortot for solo piano. So it's the Franck Sonata, famous. It's not Frank Sinatra. It sounds like that. That's a dad joke. I'm sorry. I'm a dad, so I tell dad jokes. Yeah, this piece. He wrote it in his later years because Franck, unlike Mozart, he wrote all his masterpieces much later in life. He's sort of the opposite of a child prodigy. And I like that. I really love that about him. He was such a great composer. Mainly wrote everything, but he wrote a lot of organ music. He was a church organist. And there's this kind of Catholic mysticism in his music a lot of the time. And the way I describe this piece is, well, think about a certain book. Marcel Proust's Swann's Way, which is the first of the set of the À la recherche du temps perdu. And there's a fictional violin sonata in there, which is very symbolic. It represents possibly the character Swann's coming of age and love and everything. So many people think the fictional violin sonata in Proust is based on the Franck. It probably is, because this was such a popular piece then and is now still. And I think that, like Proust's writing, this doesn't develop the way a Beethoven sonata would, for example, which is more like a narrative story, which has a plot and a development, character development, right? You read Proust, it's these long flashbacks. It's like a stream of consciousness. And this piece is like that. It's just sort of a swirling French perfume. Well, I don't know if it's quite that, but it's not. It's different. So anyway, here's the first movement of the Franck. I don't know if Franck would like that, because he was actually Belgian originally, and I know the French and Belgians, they hate each other and they tell all these jokes about each other, and this is silly how people hate each other. So anyway, tangent. Here's the piece, César Franck, first movement of the violin sonata. Meditation from Thais by Massenet. It's a famous violin piece. It's from the opera Thais, 1891. And a little background on the opera, which is not done very much. It's hard to sing, apparently. It's about Thais, who's a young lady who worships Venus. Well, it takes place in Egypt at the time of the Roman Empire, the end of the Roman Empire. And so Thais worships the goddess Venus and all the other Greco-Roman gods and goddesses. And there's a young man who's an early Christian monk who has the job to convert her. And because it's opera, he falls in love with her in the process. That's kind of all the opera plots are sort of the same. So, this is a beautiful piece. It's in the opera, it's not sung, it's an interlude for solo violin and orchestra. And for that reason, a lot of violinists play it as a concert piece. So I'm playing the piano version, obviously. So. jazz, very fireworks. I played that somewhere, and a lady came to me and said, "Let me tell you a secret." I said, "Okay." And she said, "Clearly, it's superior on the violin." I can't argue with it. Can't argue with it. But anyway, okay, here is Franz Liszt's arrangement of Paganini's 24th Caprice for solo violin. It's famous, you know, yum, da 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 ding, da 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 da, right? Now, Paganini was this kind of wild man in the late 18th century, early 19th century, very controversial. Some people thought he was possessed, really, and he was more like a rock star of today rather than a classical musician. He really stood out in that age of enlightenment. You know, he was not that. He was more of a Jimi Hendrix type or something, really. And the Romantics loved this. Franz Liszt heard him play, and it jolted him out of a period of depression, actually. He was his father had died, he had a failed romantic relationship. He tried to jump in the Seine River, actually, at one point. Liszt was in Paris at that time. How to be sad in Paris, I don't know, but he was. And then the rest is history. He locked himself in a room, Liszt did, to work incessantly because he was so inspired by Paganini. He wanted to translate what Paganini did on the violin to the piano. And he did these arrangements during this period, 1830s. I'm playing Busoni's version of Liszt's version of Paganini's, just too many names, but Busoni was an early 20th century Italian composer. If you want people to think you speak Italian, like I don't, you just say, Ferruccio Busoni, and it sounds like you do. So it sounds like I do.
So here it is.
I just, that's another thing I do. I love playing Southern Gospel. It's from my dad's side, the influence of it. So I'm going to play, he's got the whole world in his hands in the style that Mahalia Jackson would sing it. Just to point out, I love Mahalia Jackson. I think she's maybe the greatest musician ever, if you could say such a thing. Once I played something in the style of her singing and her music, and someone was laughing in the back, and I was really upset. And when I went to the car, I realized that he probably thought I had said Michael Jackson. So it's a little different. Nothing wrong with Michael, I'm just saying it's different. Mahalia Jackson was an old school gospel singer, so this is how she would do it.